All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live again with another afternoon of Catalyst Talks. I want to welcome Colin Guinn, who is going to be a very interesting conversation for the next 25 minutes. We were introduced by my business partner, Brett Boyd, because in this era of COVID, Brett and I are looking for every opportunity to help businesses understand what's being disrupted, underlying assumptions about the way we used to do things, and now what we need to be thinking about. And when it comes to drones and robotics and autonomous robotics, there's probably nobody better than Colin. When you look at his profile or you look at what he's done just at first glance, it seems rather modest. But what he's actually done in reality is impressive. As he likes to, well, as I like to say when I heard about it, he helped Elon Musk understand his first drone when he was using it. So he's been there, done that everywhere from building them and deploying them, helping people and policymakers think through them, appeared on 60 Minutes, testified before Congress. If you have questions about where we are right now with drones and robotics going forward, Colin is available for your question and answer. So Colin, first of all, thanks for taking the time. This is a live interview for those that are watching, so your Q&A can come in. But it also means we can drop and lose audio or visual. And if we do, we'll just come right back on for the next 20 minutes or so. So Colin, how are you and your family doing? And how are things in this era of COVID?
Well, I think like all of us, we're just making the best of it. And, as a business, we're replacing lost revenues with new revenue opportunities and, doing our best to be nimble and flexible. And I think that, obviously being in autonomous robotics, there's a lot of opportunity that has, come along with this crisis. Obviously, large crises like this are always a driving force for innovation. So, I think it's been a double-edged sword, and we're taking the time to spend a little bit of quality time with the family and, make the best of it.
Yeah, and you told me your son just finished online classes or online instruction and now gets to take a break.
That's right. Yeah, he's just took a paddleboard over to the beach. So
that's not a bad way to do it. It gives a whole new meaning to shelter in place. So let's take this conversation in a couple different directions, and I really want to flow by what you find to be most important, what we at Grayline are most interested in, and of course, any questions that might come in from people that are watching live. But I think it'd be helpful just because everything we talk about is leadership and strategy in a time of change. You've been at the tip of the spear watching change in terms of the technology, the implementation, and the design of drones over the last 10, 15 plus years. In a minute or two, can you just kind of walk people through that evolution of how you got to now?
Yeah, I think initially we were just looking for a way to get cameras into the air and get quality, photos and videos, aerial photos and videos. And then from there, with those aerial photos and videos, we started figuring out ways to, stabilize the camera better, build, 2D and 3D models of what was on the ground. And then, just started figuring out ways to utilize that technology to drive value in everything from creating, nice looking pictures and videos to modeling a mine or a critical infrastructure piece of equipment like a cell phone tower, a bridge, a dam, power lines. So there's a number of ways that drones can provide value just by positioning a camera in 3D space and capturing data from known points throughout space and then creating a model from that data. And then in the last probably 3 to 5 years, we've started really focusing a lot on the logistics aspect. So drones being able to deliver goods or people. So yeah, we have it's been a really interesting and fun ride with drones so far. And, obviously I think autonomous robotics will be an area to be watching over the next 10 years. And, how can we look at it as, how can we deliver more value with less watts and less calories, right? And calories are always a lot more expensive than watts. So.
Yeah. So tell me what you mean as you're instructing me and the audience. What's the difference between normal robotics and autonomous robotics? Because I would think that they already independently operate, but what is the distinction?
Yeah. So a non-autonomous robotic is just a remote control thing, right? So it could be a robot that you're controlling, and like think of one robot that I think people are familiar with are kind of like the bomb robots, that they used in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, that's a person that's manually piloting this little tank track vehicle with a robotic arm. And they've got a little camera and they're telling it what to do. They're grabbing something, they're clipping some wires, they're interacting with something in the physical world. A robot just means that it has sensors and actuators. And an autonomous robot the difference of that might be saying, hey, go map this area. Or actually, a perfect example of an autonomous robot would be a Roomba vacuum cleaner, right? So it uses a number of sensors, it uses some built-in logic, and it just does a job, right?
Yeah.
Hey, go clean my floor. And that is an autonomous robot because you're not having to manually pilot it to go and vacuum in some pattern your kitchen floor.
Yeah.
And so there's very, very high-end, extremely expensive non-autonomous robots that are manually piloted, and there's low-cost autonomous robots. So it's just the difference is that they are interacting with the physical world in a way that they are sensing more. They have more sensor inputs, and then they're making logic-based decisions based on what sensor data they're capturing, and then they're navigating throughout the world.
Well, that's super helpful, the Roomba example, because I think a lot of people can relate to it. About 10 plus years ago, my first experience with a Roomba was quite a surprise. I was house sitting for a friend, didn't realize he had a Roomba, and then it started to come in the room in the middle of the night and cause quite a stir. So now you mentioned another thing, which is
they're getting smarter. Now they don't do that in the middle of the night.
Well, good. Well, I think he had it set up somehow because he knew he was gone, or else he was just messing with me. But either way, it caused stir. But let's talk about this notion of calories and watts and reducing them so that you can improve the drone performance. So what are those limitations that we're up against right now as a technology?
Well, so I think first, anywhere that you can, let's just put this on a backdrop of an actual narrative so we can have some kind of metaphor to be talking about. So let's look at it as, we want to be able to figure out what's going on with some crops and understand if they're getting the right amount of water, or if there's any pests that are growing that need to be dealt with, right, on a farm, for instance. And so before drones, that required people walking all around the farm, and which is a highly labor intensive activity. And obviously, as human robots, we operate on calories, not on watts. And so, a lot of energy is required to grow the food that we eat. And then that food is our fuel. So anything that humans do is just, quite frankly, grossly inefficient, unless it's just using our brain power and being creative and innovative. But,
right.
Anytime you can take watts, which can be gained from the sun or the wind or fossil fuels, or stored in batteries, and then those batteries are used to control the actuators. So say in that same example, now you could have a manually piloted drone, and you could fly a remote control helicopter with a camera looking down, and you could say, hey, I took some pictures and it looks like it's greener over on this part of the farm than that part of the farm, so maybe that part of the farm needs more water.
Right.
And so you could derive some basic information from that. So then, and then it would still require the human to operate the remote control helicopter and to go and put it outside and set it on the ground and fly it around. So of the equation of how much energy is used to generate the value of those images, the vast majority of it is the human. Right. And so let's take another example where you see a company like maybe American Robotics, which is a company out of Carnegie Mellon. They're in Boston. It's American-robotics.com. They make a fully autonomous drone station specifically for agriculture. So now you just put a box on your field with a solar panel. The solar panel gets free energy from the sun, charges the batteries inside the box, which has a drone. That drone pops out of the box every day, and then in a very organized and consistent fashion takes a whole bunch of images, in kind of a lawnmower pattern over the farm using a multispectral sensor. So they're not just getting an RGB, like a color photo. They're getting photos, the same photo, but in a number of different color bands. Then when the drone lands, it dumps all that data onto a GPU enabled edge server that lives inside of this box. Then that computer automatically processes all those images and stitches them together into kind of a, think of it as a super high resolution satellite image is what it would look like of this farm that is very temporal, right? So it was from just minutes before. Yep. And it's multispectral. So they can look at different spectrums of light and figure out if there are pests or if there is crop stress from lack of water. Now these algorithms can actually do that autonomously and then just let the farmer know, hey, you may have an issue here, you may have an issue there. And now they're just going specifically to a location where there may be pests or specifically to a location where there may be some crop stress from lack of water.
Let's stay on that subject of specific. So Mike is tuning in. He says, do you see a limitation by being too specific to an application? He sees a company targeting LiDAR and other oil and gas pad monitoring seems to be limiting their revenue streams. What do you think about this idea of the specific application of the technologies? And thanks, Mike, for the question.
Do you see limitation? So can you put that question up on screen one more time?
Absolutely.
Do you see a limitation by being too specific to an application? I generally like very specific applications. I see a company targeting LiDAR and other for oil and gas well pad monitoring seems to be a limited revenue streams. I don't know. I would have to know more about his question. I think there are a number of companies using LiDAR equipped drones to scan well sites and look for cracks or stress. So I don't know. I mean, there's definitely huge opportunities for LiDAR in oil and gas.
Well, that's what I would build on, which is this idea that whatever company you're building, you want to try to maintain the adaptability and agility such that in a time like this, where West Texas crude is now trading almost at negative prices in terms of future, that you could pivot what you were doing if need be to service another opportunity. So, this brings up this idea of COVID. So are you seeing companies, especially because delivery is so key? I think Amazon's going to report $76 billion in this current quarter. They're making something on the tune of $60,000 a second in profit. How would autonomous robotics and or drones play into this era of COVID, and what opportunities do you see?
Well, so obviously, I think the biggest opportunity is in logistics. And we've got a couple of examples that we can talk about. Actually, somebody I used to work with at DJI is the program manager and product manager for SF Express, which is kind of the FedEx of China. And they've developed delivery drones over the last couple of years and happened to have the timing work out really well with the coronavirus situation. They were already doing deliveries. They were actually delivering really high value crops that only grow above 5,000 meters. So very high altitude, or above 4,000 meters, but they're delivering from like 4,500 meters down to the valley of the mountain. And then they kind of repurpose their entire drone fleet to take in medical supplies and masks and vaccine, not vaccines, but samples and test samples and things like that into Wuhan. And I think they completed over 20,000 flights in like a 6-week period and delivered over 70 tons of goods.
Whoa! Can I interrupt? What are the average weight capacity or weight capability?
10 kilograms.
What's that?
Yeah, so 10 kilogram payloads per flight.
So for us English-based metric folk or non-metric folks,
22 pounds.
10 pounds. Okay.
22 pounds.
22 pounds.
22
okay.
pounds.
Thank you. I want to make sure the whole eyes gets it. So Mike actually clarified his question very specifically. Where are the best money-making opportunities for drones right now?
So I think because humans have to be so involved with most drone operations, the best value propositions or the clearest value propositions are ones in which it's hard to get a human into a place to take images of a thing. And by putting a human there, you have to turn off the operation, or you go into great risk. And so I'll give a couple of examples of that. It's federally mandated that we take pictures of all the long line power lines throughout the country to make sure the trees and vegetation are not growing into them, because as you've seen in California, that can cause major problems.
That's the exact point. Right. Yeah.
And And so one way of doing that, and the standard way that we've been doing that for years, is by putting 3 people in a helicopter flying over these power lines with one person hanging out of the back with a camera and just taking pictures. And they're obviously flying very expensive, very large, heavy helicopters in a fashion that's what we call out of the chart, right? So if they do have an engine failure at that altitude, there's no saving it with an auto rotation. People die every single year.
Meaning
Helicopters
that they're
crash
flying
every
too
single
low
year.
to the ground.
Yeah, they're flying very low to the power lines, so they don't have the room, and they're flying very slowly, so they don't have the necessary forward momentum to do an auto rotation. So people die every year, and helicopters crash every year doing this type of work. And now you can just put a drone above a power line to take the same images. And so anytime you can replace something that was happening in a very expensive way with a drone, or then we see immediate value. So we see that right now in construction. We see that in mining. We see that in critical infrastructure inspection of power lines, cell phone towers, wind and solar farms. We don't yet see that much in agriculture. We definitely see some examples in oil and gas and in the energy sector. But it all depends, because you can't just say just construction. There's certain areas of construction where there's a very, very clear value proposition. So you can use drones to automatically measure how much dirt is in a pile very easily. Then construction companies can figure out how many dump trucks do I need to move that pile of dirt. And if I've got 15 different construction sites going on, and I can measure how much dirt is going to be coming out of the ground when I build that 5-story subterranean parking garage, and then I know this other site needs a bunch of dirt to do a big fill, they can start figuring out and getting really efficient with where they're moving their dirt around, instead of buying dirt and getting rid of dirt in different places. So, that's those are just a few examples that we're seeing.
Well, those are excellent.
Value.
And Mike thanks you already, and he was assuming that pipeline monitoring will be high value too. But let's move to a question real quick. Came in from Tom Coyle. He says, what will this do for drone manufacturing in the U.S. as opposed to buying Chinese drones?
So I think there are a number of examples, especially in critical infrastructure, where people are expecting or government entities are requiring the drones to be coming from the U.S. or an ally. Obviously, drones collect a lot of data, and even if it's just the telemetry data that they're collecting, that telemetry data says when and where the drones have been, where they've been collecting data. And obviously that can be fairly sensitive. So as drones are used more for government applications and critical infrastructure applications, roadway projects, dams, bridges, the sensitivity around where they're manufactured and where that data is going is getting to be more and more important. So we are seeing some opportunities for US made drones. The government's involved with this through entities like DIU and AFWorks and Rapid Equipping Force. And there's actually a short-range reconnaissance drone project going on. That's an OTA from DIU, which is another transactional vehicle from DIU, which is Defense Innovation Unit. And
thanks for clarifying those acronyms.
So they are basically spurring innovation among young drone startups in the U.S. because the U.S. Army has said, we want to have this capability. We don't want to just give away this capability to overseas companies that have a huge lead in the space. So yeah, we're definitely seeing increased demand for what we call blue drones.
Yeah. Well, let's stay on the topic of military use of drones for just a second and talk about swarming and nano drones. If I'm using the wrong terms on either, correct me, but I know the military has been looking at, in open source, has been looking at for a long time, the idea of just completely overwhelming an area with drones so that they had to put less boots on the ground. What thoughts do you have there?
Well, I guess I don't know exactly what you mean by overwhelming an area with a lot of drones. They put less boots on the ground. I know that, drones for ISR applications are just a no-brainer, even just to be able to see what's over the hill. I think once you weaponize a drone, then, there becomes I think a lot of debate around what are the ethics of, who's making the kill decision if there's a human in that loop. it's hard to just use machine learning and say that's a bad guy, so shoot him, because then we start getting into a whole other higher level discussion.
Absolutely.
And so we don't do a ton of that type of work or development. We specialize primarily on autonomous value creation, and I think I'm more interested in where a bunch of robots can be working together to increase our species' likelihood of hanging around on this planet for a little longer. We have some problems that exist now that could very easily be mitigated, at the very least, by drones and other autonomous robotics. So, for example, we've got a big problem with plastic bottles in the ocean, and imagine a scenario. Imagine a scenario where we just create ocean Roombas, so giant solar-powered ocean Roombas that are picking up plastic bottles from the ocean, putting them onto solar-powered container ships that take these plastic bottles to shore. This could be all done completely autonomously with no humans in the loop. Then there's a company, I don't know if you know, Loomis in Austin with Icon, the 3D printed housing company. So they're an Austin startup, and they could be using these plastic bottles as aggregate to 3D print houses. So you could literally have a number of autonomous robotics with machine learning, computer vision, with the necessary algorithms to find, locate, collect the plastic bottles, send them to the right location, and then they could be autonomously printing those into houses for underserved countries. So I think there's different sides to the spectrum of where you can use this technology. And obviously there's a huge financial motivation for, making some of these technologies for the military, because obviously that, those activities will always be going on. So yeah, I think, their application spans across the board.
Well, I mean, the fact you brought up the plastic bottles in the ocean, I've seen photos, and I encourage viewers to, whether they're watching it live or later on, go and watch them and just look at these photos of these just football field mile long. I mean, these photos are incredible of what this floating plastic debris looks like. And that's a pretty interesting way of looping it together, because another interview we had earlier in this series was with Samantha Snabs of RE3D. And that's what they do. They take waste materials as the actual composite for their 3D printing. So if there's a question, well, let's get to Mike's here real quick, see if we can read it. Let's see. AI seems critical. Let's see. First responders not having a pilot skill sets, but having the need for improved situation awareness. How do you see your technology efforts improving police and fire safety?
So, AI is a broad term. I would say, you can do a lot with just basic computer vision and machine learning. But yes, I think in scenarios where you're in a search and rescue scenario where you're looking for, somebody lost off the side of a cliff or in the wilderness, being able to send a drone on an autonomous mission. So it's flying some kind of search and rescue pattern over the area, or it could be based on the vehicle that's driving along a road, and then it's flying a specific path based on the vehicle's location.
Yeah, nice overlay pattern around it.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and then it could be looking down at the ground and essentially using computer vision. Say you've got a thermal sensor aboard, or an EOIR solution, which is an electro-optical and an infrared sensor. You could be looking for hotspots and say, hey, that's a potential person. And that's a way where you can cover a lot more ground a lot more quickly by using a basic thermal camera on a low price, low cost, small, lightweight drone that can fly for an hour at a time. And then you just swap out the batteries and fly for another hour, and you can cover a lot more area a lot more quickly.
Yeah. And Mike, one thing I'll add to that, I know there's technologies that would work in complement with the drone technologies that Colin's talking about. There are sensors, audio sensors that basically shoot in all directions, that if a shot were to be fired, say in a downtown area, we would be able to pinpoint exactly the location and direction of the sound, and then maybe perhaps deploy these autonomous robotic technologies to be able to provide surveillance, so that, as we say in the military, we gain and maintain contact and never lose that person, so the authorities can come in and provide the human touch, if you will. So what, as we close out now, Colin, what did I not ask that people would most be interested in learning about what you're doing, or as you look to leadership and strategy going forward and changing the world that they ought to be thinking about?
Well, I guess I would just close with this, which is that, obviously the FAA's job is to keep our national airspace as safe as possible. And their job is to keep it safe by not introducing new risk. And inherently, having drones fly around in the national airspace is introducing some new risk, because you now have additional things flying around in space.
Right.
So even though people crash and die every year flying helicopters over power lines, that is an existing use case of helicopters. That's an existing risk that is already calculated into all the equations. And when they look at adding drones to the national airspace, they don't look at necessarily what risk does that eliminate or get rid of, and is it replacing with a less risky thing. It's just looked at as, well, it's still new risk.
That's
and
right.
So because of that decision-making process, it has become a little bit difficult to get legislation passed and to get ordinances in place to be able to fly drones commercially, and especially to be able to fly drones beyond visual line of sight or autonomously. And so it has just kind of slowed the whole cycle of innovation, because there's a lot of VCs that are funding companies that are working on SLAM solutions, which is like simultaneous localization and mapping, which is a key technology used for automation. And these companies are not necessarily willing to fund companies like American Robotics, for instance, that has this great agriculture solution, because it relies on beyond visual line of sight applications, and the FAA has been really slow to adopt those legislation and those policies. It's kind of slowed the whole thing down. Now we look at ourselves in this global pandemic saying, wow, the technology was not the long pole in the tent. Like, we could have been using drones, and Amazon Prime Air could have been delivering packages, and that whole infrastructure could have already been there 18 months ago or 2 years ago. And then come COVID-19 crisis, it's like, great, let's just have more drones delivering more critical supplies to the hospitals, and more masks, and delivering medications to people. That we would have been able to immediately leverage this technology. And so I think coming out of this, if nothing else, it will be a marker that we can point to say, look, we have to find a balance between moving deliberately and safely, and making sure that we're not introducing too many new risks into the national airspace. But at the same time, we can see that there are threats beyond ourselves that can and will happen, and will continue to happen. So we should be leveraging these technologies to the best of our ability, so that we can be as prepared as possible the next time something like this happens. And so, I guess that's
oh yeah, I mean, as a student of history, when Brett and I wrote our book Catalyst, which is the whole namesake of this interview series, I point out the fact that in the late 1800s, when motor vehicles started to pop up on the scene, people were so resistant to them that some cities and communities passed a law that said you had to turn off your engine, and in some cases dismantle your vehicle if another horse and buggy were coming, because it was alarming the horses. So let's hope going forward you maintain a leadership role in this, Colin. We look forward to following what you're doing. I appreciate you taking the time under these unusual conditions to be able to speak to not only the viewers of Catalyst Talks, but also what you do at the leading edge to help people understand that in a time of a changing world, we do need leadership and strategy and thinking through the underlying assumptions. So Colin, thanks for being here today, and stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in touch.
Okay. Thank you very much. Same to you. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Take care. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Again, this is the live version of Catalyst Talks, and we'll throw it over on LinkedIn so we can continue discussion. If there were other links, if there were other questions that you had, hopefully we'll be able to have Colin be able to follow up on LinkedIn or some member of his team to answer any further questions that you might have. Again, as all things in a changing world, this is when we need to just understand the underlying assumptions and figure out what leadership and strategy is necessary to carry us forward. If there's a topic that you'd like to have discussed, or if there's a person that you think would be interesting, like Colin was today, reach out either on LinkedIn through this feed here, or hit me at josephkopser.com or at graylinegroup.com. We'll be happy to answer your questions. Thanks a lot. Stay safe and stay in touch. Take care.